There is a list she keeps in her head. Not written down. Written things can be found. This list lives only in the place behind her eyes where she keeps everything that is true about herself. The things she cannot say out loud, the things she has not said out loud in 8 years, the things that would get her killed in the time it takes the news to travel from one end of Valen to the other. The list is short. Her name is Sera. She is 26 years old. She has been a tavern keeper and a seamstress and a laundress and a woman who mends boots, depending on what the town needed that week. And she is a healer. The last healer in the Kingdom of Aldrath. She does not know this for certain. She tells herself on the bad nights that there must be others. Hidden in other border towns. Living other invented lives. Keeping their own lists behind their own eyes. She does not know this for certain. What she knows for certain is that in the Kingdom of Aldrath, healers are called witches. Have been called witches for 3 generations. Since the purging, since the king's great-grandfather decided that what could not be understood must be feared, and that what was feared must be eliminated, and that elimination was cleanest when it was complete. They burned them. The records say 84. The records are almost certainly wrong. The records were kept by the people who did the burning. Sera knows about the burning because her mother told her. Her mother knew because her mother's mother survived it. Barely, hidden in a root cellar under a neighbor's floor while the smoke came through the boards. 3 days. The neighbor brought her bread at night and never told anyone. That neighbor has been dead for 40 years. Sera has thought about her often. What does it cost a person to hide someone dangerous? What does it cost them to bring bread in the dark and say nothing? She's about to find out. Not about the bread. About the hiding. His name is Aldrich Thorn. He is the younger brother of the king. He has been riding through the wrong part of the forest for 3 days with a wound in his side that is slowly killing him, and he is going to arrive at her tavern door in approximately 40 minutes, bleeding through his riding coat and trying very hard not to show it. Sera will know what he is the moment she sees him. She will also know what is killing him. She will know, with the specific bone-deep certainty of someone who has been hiding a gift for 8 years and has never stopped using it in secret, that she can save him. And she will have to decide in the space of one breath whether to do it. She will save him. Of course she will save him. She is a healer. That is the one thing that has never once asked her permission. The problem that will unravel 8 years of careful invisibility and change the course of a kingdom and cost her the life she built from borrowed names and useful skills, is what happens after. What happens when he wakes up? What happens when he starts asking questions? What happens when the man she saved decides that what she is should not be what the law says it is? This is that story. Chapter 1. She knows something is wrong before he knocks. The tavern is quiet at this hour. After the dinner crowd and before the late drinkers, the specific lull that she uses to balance the ledger and check the stores and give herself 15 minutes of silence in a life that does not have much of it. She is behind the bar with the accounts book when the door opens. Not knocks. Opens. A man who knocks has the energy to knock. A man who simply pushes through a door with one hand is a man using everything he has for that single action. She looks up. He's tall. Well-dressed. The riding coat is expensive, the boots are quality, the horse she can see through the open door behind him is the kind of horse that does not come cheap. His hair is dark and he is somewhere between 30 and 35 and he would be handsome in the way of men who have never had to think much about whether they are handsome, except that right now he is the specific color of someone whose body is making an argument that he is losing. Sweating despite the cold. His left hand is pressed to his left side in the way that is not casual, in the way of someone who has been pressing a wound for long enough that the pressing has become automatic.
You've been poisoned.
She knows before she comes around the bar. She knows the way she always knows.
This.
Not from the color or the sweat
Sera.
or the hand against his side, but from the thing underneath all of that. The thing she has no good word for. The thing her mother called the sight, which is not seeing exactly, more like feeling at a distance, the body's equivalent of a bell being struck and feeling it in your teeth before you hear the sound. Poison. Not common poison. Something specific. Something that has been in him for at least 2 days. working through his system with the particular patience of something that knows it will win eventually. He does not know yet that he is not going to win. She does. He comes around the bar. She keeps her face at the temperature of a woman who sees an injured traveler and is going to help him to a chair and send for. There is no one to send for in Valen. There has not been anyone to send for since old Perrin, the so-called physician, left 3 years ago, taking his useless collection of incorrect remedies with him. She is all there is. He has always been all there is. You need to sit down, she says. I need a room, he says. You need to sit down first, she says, and then we can discuss the room. He looks at her. People do not generally give him instructions. She can see this in the specific way his expression shifts. Not offended, more like encountering something that doesn't fit the category he expected. He sits. Not because she told him to, she thinks. Because his body has been voting for this for some time and she has simply provided it the opportunity. She brings water. She brings the good bread, the dense kind, the kind with protein in it that will do more good than the white. She sets them in front of him and watches him assess whether to eat or maintain the pretense that he is fine. He eats. Good. That means there is still enough of him functioning to recognize the need. How long, she says. He looks at her. The wound, she says. How long ago? A pause in which he considers denying that there is a wound, assesses her face, and concludes that the denial will not be effective. 3 days, he says. Through the northern forest? He blinks. How did you? There's a plant in the northern forest, she says, keeping her voice level and informational, the tone of someone sharing a local hazard, nothing more unusual than that. Red thorn. The thorns are poisonous. Not immediately fatal but slow. It requires a specific treatment. He looks at her. You're the tavern keeper, he says. Among other things, she says. Do you have this treatment? She looks at him. At the riding coat. At the quality of the horse outside. At the specific way he carries himself even now. The automatic assumption of authority so deeply embedded that it persists even when his body is trying to shut down. She has seen this man's face before. Not in person. On the coin. The royal mint issues them with the king's image on one side and the younger prince on the other. The coin is Aldrich's profile. The coin she uses every day in this tavern. She knows exactly who is sitting at her bar eating her good bread. She also knows what he needs and she knows she can provide it and she knows what it will cost her when he wakes up and starts asking questions, because men like this always ask questions, and men like this do not stop asking until they have answers. She thinks about all of this in about 4 seconds. Then she says, "Come with me." She takes him to the back room. The room she uses for things she does not do in public. The drying herbs no one is supposed to see. The books she keeps under the floorboard. Her mother's books, her mother's mother's books. The accumulated knowledge of 3 generations of women who could not be openly what they were. She does not take him far enough into the room to see all of this. She sits him at the small table near the door and she goes to the shelf that looks like an ordinary pantry shelf and takes down the things she needs. He watches her. "You've done this before," he says. "I've lived near the northern forest for 8 years, she says. Red thorn poisoning is not uncommon in travelers who don't know what to avoid. This is true. It is also not the whole truth. She mixes the compound quickly with the efficiency of someone who has done this in her sleep and has done it in her sleep because she has dreamed of it, because this is what she is and what she does and she cannot stop doing it even when stopping would be the sensible choice. "I need to see the wound," she says. He removes his coat. His shirt. She keeps her eyes at the professional temperature. She has seen wounds since she was old enough to understand what she was looking at. This is a wound. It is also, she presses 2 fingers carefully to the edges of it and reads what she feels, worse than she thought. Not impossible. But the poison has had 2 days and it has been thorough. "You should have stopped sooner," she says. "I had somewhere to be," he says. "You almost didn't get there," she says. She works. She's very good at this. She has been good at this since she was 9 years old, and she helped her mother set a broken arm in the middle of the night for a farmer who could not afford a physician and would not have wanted the questions that came with one. She has been good at it for 17 years of practice in the dark. "What's your name?" he asks. "Sera," she says. "Just Sera." "For now," she says. He is quiet for a moment. She can feel him assessing this, choosing whether to push. "Aldrath," he says. "Just Aldrath." She does not look up from the wound. "I know," she says. A silence. "The coin," she says. "Ah," he says. "Hold still," she says. "This part is going to be unpleasant." It is unpleasant. He holds still. She finishes the first stage of the treatment and covers the wound with the compress and steps back. "You're going to sleep," she says. "Your body needs to work. The compound will help, but you have to give it the space to work. I need to send a message. After you sleep," she says. "You don't tell a prince to sleep," he says. "I tell patients to sleep," she says. "You're currently a patient. We can revisit the prince part after." He looks at her. Again that expression, the encountering something unexpected expression. Then slowly he lies down on the narrow bed in the corner. "Sera," he says. "Yes," she says. "Thank you," he says. His eyes close. She stands in the back room with her kit open on the table and the dying fire in the hearth and the herbs hanging from the rafters that she has always said are for cooking. She looks at the prince asleep in her back room. He thinks that is done. He thinks, now the question is what happens when he wakes up. He sleeps for 14 hours. She checks on him 3 times in the night. His pulse strengthens by the 3rd hour, the compound doing what it is supposed to do. His color improves by the 7th. By the 10th hour he is sleeping the way a person sleeps when they are genuinely recovering rather than simply not dying, which is a distinction she has learned to read with precision. She runs the tavern during the day. She is very good at running the tavern. She has been Sera the tavern keeper for 3 years in Valen, and Mara the seamstress for 2 years before that in the town down the river. And before that she was other people in other places, always moving before the questions accumulated into something she couldn't carry. She serves the breakfast crowd. He smiles at the right moments. She listens to old Bevan complain about his knee and nods at the appropriate intervals and does not tell him that she could fix his knee in 20 minutes if anyone in this kingdom would let her. She thinks about this sometimes. What she could do if she were allowed to do it. She thinks about it more today with a prince in her back room whose life she has saved with the thing that would get her killed if anyone knew she had it. He wakes up mid-afternoon. She hears him, the creak of the bed, the sound of careful movement. A brief pause that she reads as him assessing his own body and finding it somewhat improved. He goes to the back room. He is sitting up. Still pale but genuinely better. The specific better of someone who has turned a corner rather than someone who has just stopped declining. He is looking at the room. She had a window of time to be more careful about what he could see. He was running a tavern. She was not perfectly careful. The herbs on the ceiling. The books she should have put back under the floor. The second kit on the shelf that does not look like a cooking pantry kit. He looks at her when she enters. "How do you feel?" she says. "Better than I should," he says. "Given where I was yesterday." "The compound worked," she says. "You'll need 2 more doses over the next day and then you should be clear of the worst of it." He nods. His eyes go back to the room. "Sera," he says. "Yes," she says. "What is this room?" She keeps her face steady. "Storage." "Those herbs," he says. "On the ceiling." "For cooking," she says. He looks at her. "Some of them are for cooking," he says. She says nothing. "My mother had an herb garden," he says. "When I was a child. Before she died. She used to teach me the names." He pauses. "She would have called some of those on your ceiling medicinal." Sera stands in the doorway of the room she has kept secret for 3 years and watches the prince from the royal family that authorized the purging of every healer in the kingdom look at her ceiling. What are you, he says. Not what are you hiding. Not, are you a witch? Just, what are you? The question of someone trying to understand rather than accuse. She looks at him. She thinks about her options. She has been thinking about her options since last night, in the spaces between checking on him. She has mapped every path out of this moment, and every path has a cost. I'm a tavern keeper, she says. And, he says. The silence stretches. And the person who saved your life, she says. He looks at her for a long time. I know, he says. That's why I'm asking carefully. He comes into the room and sits at the table. She folds her hands on the surface. The compound I used, she says slowly, is a preparation that takes specific knowledge to make correctly. Knowledge that is not in any publicly available text in this kingdom. No, he says. It isn't. If I tell you where that knowledge comes from, she says, I am telling you something that could be used against me. Yes, he says. And you're asking anyway, she says. I'm asking because I want to understand, he says. Not because I want to use it against you. She looks at him. At the prince. At the man who said thank you before he lost consciousness, in the specific tone of someone who meant it. My mother was a healer, she says. Her mother was a healer. The knowledge comes from them. The silence that follows is careful on both sides. How long have you been hiding? He asks. She looks at her hands. 8 years, she says. Since my mother died. He is quiet. How did your mother? The fever, she says. Not the purging. The fever that went through the eastern provinces 8 years ago. She was treating people and she got it herself. She pauses. She was the best healer I knew, and she died of something she could not treat in herself because she did not have enough hands and she could not ask for help. He's very still. I'm sorry, he says. She looks at him. So am I, she says. Every day. A silence. Sera, he says. She looks up. I am not going to tell anyone what you are, he says. Not because of what you did for me. Because what you are should not be a crime. She looks at him for a long time. That is a very easy thing to say, she says carefully, and a very difficult thing to guarantee. I know, he says. I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm telling you my intention. She nods. Once. You need the second dose, she says. And then you need to eat. All right, he says. And then, she says, you're going to tell me why you were riding through the northern forest alone. He looks at her. Why, he says. Because people who ride through the northern forest alone usually have a reason, she says. And people with reasons usually need help. And, she stops. And, he says. And I am tired, she says quietly, of watching things go wrong when I know how to fix them and am not allowed to. He looks at her. Something shifts in his face. All right, he says. Second dose. Then I'll tell you. His name is Aldrich Thorn. He is 29 years old. He is the younger brother of King Cassian Thorn, who has been ruling the kingdom for 6 years following the death of their father, who ruled it for 22 years following the death of his father, who started the purging. Aldrich did not start the purging. He also did not stop it. He tells her this directly, sitting at the small table in her back room eating the stew she brought, with the second dose of compound working through him and the color slowly returning to his face. I was 8 years old when my grandfather died, he says. I was too young to stop anything. By the time I was old enough to have opinions, the law had been in place for 30 years. And now, she says. He looks at the stew. Now I am 29, he says, and I sit on a council that enforces a law I think is wrong, and I have been trying for 3 years to change it through the appropriate channels, and the appropriate channels have told me approximately 40 times that the law is fine. She looks at him. So you went through the northern forest, she says. There are rumors, he says. About the border towns. About people who can do things that the law says cannot be done. He pauses. I have been trying to find evidence. Something to bring to the council that is not testimony, because testimony is dismissed. Something real. You were looking for a healer, she says. He looks at her. Yes, he says. He sits with this. And you found one, she says. Yes, he says. And she saved your life, she says. Yes, he says. And now you want to use that to change the law, she says. He holds her gaze. I want to use my own experience, what happened to me in this room with this treatment, as evidence that the law is based on a misunderstanding. That healers are not what the law says they are. Sera looks at her hands. She has been waiting, she realizes. She has been waiting for this conversation for 8 years without knowing she was waiting for it. Since her mother died. Since she packed her mother's books and her mother's kit and started inventing names for herself in towns that didn't know her. She has been waiting for someone to say, the law is wrong. She has heard it before in whispers from people who needed her help and knew what she was and kept her secret. But whispers are not the counsel. Whispers do not change the law. Whispers are what you do when you are afraid. What do you need from me, she says. He looks at her. I need you to come to the capital, he says. I need you to stand in front of the council and be what you are. She looks at him. That will get me killed, she says. Not if I stand next to you, he says. You don't know that, she says. You don't know what the council will do. You don't know what your brother will do. No, he says. I don't. She looks at him. At the prince who said I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm telling you my intention. At least he is honest about the limits of what he can promise. I need to think, she says. Of course, he says. You need more rest, she says. Yes, he says. He gets up. Sera, he says. She stops. Why did you save me, he says. You knew who I was. You could have. I'm a healer, she says. He looks at her. That's the whole answer, she says. She goes back to her tavern. She stands behind the bar and serves drinks and listens to old Bevan and nods at the appropriate intervals and thinks, the whole time, about what it would cost to stop being nobody. She watches him decide not to push and she files that away. In the evenings he comes out into the tavern. He does not announce himself. He finds a corner table and sits with a drink and watches the room. He talks to the people who talk to him. Travelers mostly who don't know his face from the coin. The locals who do know it give him a wide berth, which she understands. A prince in your tavern is either a blessing or a problem, and in Valen's experience the powerful have mostly been the second. She watches him talk to a farmer about the harvest. A real conversation. He asks questions that show he actually knows what a difficult harvest means. Not abstractly, not as an economic figure, but in the specific texture of it. The farmer's face when he realizes this. The slight confusion of someone encountering a thing in the wrong category. She's collecting data. It is what she does. On the third morning she comes into the back room with breakfast and sits across from him and says, "Tell me what it would look like." He looks at her. "The council session," she says. "What would it actually look like? Walk me through it." He does. He is honest. This is the thing she has been assessing for 3 days. Whether he is honest, and the assessment comes back the same way every time. He does not oversell what he can protect her from. He does not promise outcomes he cannot guarantee. He tells her what he knows, admits what he doesn't, and does not fill the gaps with false confidence. The council will resist, he says. My brother's advisors have been telling him for years that the healer law is necessary for stability. They will argue that changing it sets a precedent for questioning all the laws from the purging era. He pauses. Some of them will argue for your arrest. And your brother? She says. He is quiet for a moment. Cassian is. He stops. Cassian inherited the law the way you inherit furniture. He has not thought about it very much. He has not had a reason to. He pauses. What happened to me will give him a reason. He might decide the law still stands, she says. Yes, Aldrich says. He might. And then I'm standing in front of the council having identified myself and there is nothing between me and the law, she says. Yes, he says. She looks at him. You're very bad at convincing people to do things, she says. Something at the corner of his mouth. I've been told. Most people in your position would be promising me things, she says. Most people in my position would be promising things they can't deliver, he says. I'd rather give you accurate information and let you make a real decision. She looks at him. Why does the law need to change, she says. Give me the real answer. Not the principle. The practical one. He looks at her. Because people are dying, he says. Every year. From things that don't have to be fatal. From fevers and infections and wounds that a healer could address in an afternoon. He pauses. The Eastern fever 8 years ago. The one that killed your mother. 3,000 people died in that fever. My estimate, and I have looked at the records carefully, is that a third of them did not need to die. If there had been healers who could practice openly, who could have moved through the affected villages without hiding, without the risk. He stops. 1,000 people, she says. At minimum, he says. She looks at her hands. Hi, mother, she says. Yes, he says. If she had been able to ask for help. If there had been other healers she could have sent for. If she had not had to work alone because working together meant being found. Don't, she says. He stops. She breathes. I know, she says. I know all of this. I've known it for 8 years. He is quiet. That's why you kept doing it, he says. Even after. Even with the risk. She looks up. Someone has to, she says. He looks at her. Yes, he says. Someone does. The silence between them is different from the silences before. Something has shifted in it. Some alignment has happened, not between what they want, which she has understood for 2 days, but between what they believe. What they think is true about the world and what they are willing to do about it. If I come to the capital, she says, and the council moves to arrest me, what happens? I intervene, he says. And if your brother supports the arrest? I still intervene, he says. That would be treason, she says. He meets her eyes. I know, he says. She looks at him for a long time. At the prince who rode through the wrong forest looking for evidence of something he already believed. At the man who said, I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm telling you my intention. At the person sitting across from her who just told her very quietly that he would commit treason rather than let the law take her. All right, she says. He goes very still. All right, he says. I'm coming to the capital, she says. But we do it my way. What is your way, he says. We go slowly, she says. We build the case before we make it. You go back first. You need to recover properly and I need to arrange things here. And then we go together, and when we go with everything. Everything, he says. Every record I have, she says. Every person I have treated who is still alive and willing to speak. Every letter my mother kept. Every piece of evidence that this is not witchcraft. That it is knowledge, that it is skill, that it has been saving lives for 3 generations in the dark because we were not allowed to save them in the light. He looks at her. That will take time to compile, he says. 3 weeks, she says. 3 weeks. He agrees. He gets up. Finish your breakfast, she says. You need 1 more dose and then you're well enough to travel. Sera, he says. She stops. Why are you doing this, he says. No. After 8 years of being careful. She looks at the ceiling. At the herbs. Because someone has to, she says. And I'm tired of waiting for someone else to be first. He leaves on the 4th day. She stands in the yard behind the tavern and watches him go and then goes back inside and stands in her back room for a while with the door closed. She has made a decision. She is clear-eyed about what the decision costs. She starts to compile. 3 weeks. She has 3 weeks. He begins with the records. The records are the most dangerous thing she owns. More dangerous than the herbs, more dangerous than the kits because the records are proof. Specific, dated, detailed proof that she has been practicing for 8 years in a kingdom that calls it a crime. She has kept them anyway. She has kept them because her mother kept them. Because her mother's mother kept them. Because 3 generations of women who could not be what they were openly decided that the next generation deserved to know that the work was real. that the knowledge was real, that the healing was real. The records are in the floorboard. She has had them out at night, sometimes when the tavern is closed and the street is quiet, to read through what her mother and her mother's mother wrote. To feel like they are still in the room. She brings them out now in daylight for the first time. She reads through all of them. There are more than she remembered. Her own records go back 8 years and they are thorough. Dates, presenting conditions, treatments, outcomes. The people she treated who are still alive and still in the towns she lived in. The farmer in the next village whose daughter she brought through a fever 5 years ago. The woman in Valen herself who she treated for an infected wound 2 winters ago, quietly after dark, who has never spoken of it and who gave her a very particular look when she saw her in the market 3 days after that, said thank you and I will never tell simultaneously. There are also her mother's records. And her grandmother's. She reads her grandmother's records for the first time. They are extraordinary. This woman, who survived the purging in a root cellar while the smoke came through the boards, kept records in the most careful, detailed, thorough hand Sera has ever seen. She was treating people through all of it. The families who hid her. The neighbors who brought bread. She was treating them the whole time in secret at night, moving between the people who needed her and the places that were safe. Sera reads these records and thinks about the neighbor who brought bread. Who was that person? What did they know? What did it cost them to bring bread in the dark to a woman the law said was a witch? He doesn't know. She writes down the date in her own journal. Today I read my grandmother's records for the first time. She treated 47 people during the purging. He kept every one of them. I'm going to put her name on something that lasts longer than a floorboard. She closes the journal. He gets up. She goes to the farmer in the next village. His name is Tomas and his daughter is 9 years old now, and when she was 4 she had a fever that should have killed her and didn't. He is in his field when she arrives. He sees her coming and his face does the thing. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying a piece of information for 5 years and has not known what to do with it and is now encountering the person who is most relevant to the question of what to do with it. Sera, he says. Tomas, she says. I need to ask you something. He tells him. Not all of it, not the capital, not the council, but enough. She tells him she is trying to change something. He tells him what she is. He tells him what she has always been. She tells him that if he is willing to speak to what happened 5 years ago, to say in front of people who matter that his daughter is alive because of something a healer did, it would help. He is quiet for a long time. She waits. Will it be dangerous for you? He says. Possibly, she says. For Elra, he says. His daughter. No, she says. I will make sure of that. Your family's names stay out of it unless you choose otherwise. He looks at his field. She's alive, he says. My Elra. Because of you. Yes, she says. And other children are dying, he says. Because there's no one. Yes, she says. He looks at her. What do you need me to say? She spends 3 weeks doing this. Talking to the people she has treated. Not everyone. Some of them are afraid and she respects that and asks nothing from them. But enough. Enough people who are alive because of something she did and who are willing to say so. She compiles the records. She writes summaries of her grandmother's notes that are clear and accessible. The dates, the cases, the treatments, the outcomes. She writes a history of the 3 healers in her family, what they knew, how they learned it, what it cost them. She writes it carefully. She writes it the way her mother wrote in the margins. Leaving the earlier thinking visible, showing the work, making it impossible for anyone to accuse her of hiding something, because she is putting everything in the light. At night she sits in the back room with the books on the table and the herbs on the ceiling and the records spread around her, and she thinks about what she is about to do. She is not afraid exactly. She is precise about this because she has learned to be precise about her own states. She is aware. Fully, completely aware of the weight of what she is carrying and the distance between where she is and where she needs to get to. She is also for the first time in 8 years not alone. That is new. She does not know entirely what to do with it. She sends Aldrath a letter on the 3rd week. Short. To the point. I'm ready. 3 days. His reply comes in too. I'll be there. He comes with 4 riders and a carriage. Not a royal carriage. A plain one, the kind that does not announce itself. She notes this. He is being careful about what is visible. She is standing in the yard with one bag and the floorboard contents wrapped in oilcloth when he arrives. He gets down from his horse. He looks better than when she last saw him. The color is fully back. He moves without the compensating stiffness of someone managing a wound. He is well. She saved him. He is, she notes, aware of this in the same way she is aware of it. Not as a debt exactly, but as a fact that is present in the space between them. You're ready, he says. I'm ready, she says. How do you feel, he says. She looks at him. Like I'm about to do something irreversible, she says. Yes, he says. That's accurate. Good, she says. I thought so. Just wanted to confirm. Something at the corner of his mouth. He picks up her bag. Tell me about your brother, she says. What I need to know about him before I'm in a room with him. He falls into step beside her as she walks to the carriage. He's cautious, Aldrath says. He does not like surprises. He does not make quick decisions, he turns things over. He is better than our father was at listening. He pauses. He is also, and this is the most important thing, he is genuinely concerned about the kingdom's welfare. Not as an abstraction. He actually thinks about the people in it. That's useful, she says. Yes, he says. It means if we make the case clearly enough. He'll consider it, she says. He'll consider it, Aldrath agrees. He gets into the carriage. He gets in across from her. The carriage moves. She watches Valen disappear through the window. The tavern. The sign she painted herself 3 years ago. The back room with the herbs on the ceiling and the floorboard and the 8 years of careful invisibility. He does not feel nostalgic. He feels something more complicated than nostalgic. Something that is grief and relief simultaneously. The specific feeling of leaving behind something that kept you safe by keeping you small. The farmer, she says. Tomas. He's willing to speak. Aldrath nods. And the woman in Valen, she asked to remain anonymous but she'll provide a written account, she says. I have 7 written accounts in total. And the records going back to my grandmother. He looks at her. You compiled all of that in 3 weeks, he says. I have been compiling it for 8 years, she says. I just didn't know what for. He holds her gaze. Sera, he says. Yes, she says. Whatever happens in that room, he says, what you are doing right now, what you have been doing for 8 years, it matters. Whether or not the council votes the way we need it to. It has always mattered. She looks at him. I know, she says. I want to make sure you know, he says. I know, she says again. Softer. She looks out the window at the road to the capital. 8 years of being nobody. She thinks about her grandmother in a root cellar with smoke coming through the boards, keeping records, treating patients, surviving. She thinks about her mother working alone through the fever that killed her. She thinks about Emery, not Emery from the wolf story, her own Emery, the one from 4 years ago, the boy in the eastern town with the infection that should have taken his arm, who is 12 years old now and has full use of both hands because she stayed 3 nights in a cold room and worked. She thinks about all the people who needed someone and had no one. I've been ready for longer than I knew, she says. Aldrath says nothing. He does not need him to. The capital is large. She knew this. She has been here once before as a child, before the hiding started, when her mother brought her to see it and held her hand on the crowded streets and said, remember that there are more people in this city than you can count, and almost every one of them will need a healer at some point in their life. She remembered. Aldrath brings her to the palace through a side entrance. Not hiding, he is clear about this and she believes him. The side entrance is simply quieter and he has arranged for her to see his brother before the council, which requires some discretion in the approach. The king's study. She has imagined this room. She is not sure what she imagined exactly. Some version of power made physical, large and cold and arranged to remind you of your size. It is actually a medium-sized room full of books and papers with a fire that is burning slightly too hot and a man behind the desk who looks up when they enter and who looks, she notes, remarkably like Aldrich except in the specific way of someone who has been doing a harder job for longer. King Cassian Thorne. 40 years old. Dark-haired. The eyes are the same gray as his brother's. He looks at Aldrich first, and his expression is the specific expression of someone seeing a person they were worried about and are now relieved by. Then he looks at her. This is Sera, Aldrich says. She's the healer who saved my life. A silence. The king looks at his brother. You told me you were treating a wound, Cassian says. I was treating a wound, Aldrich says. Sera was treating me. Another silence. You brought a healer to the palace, Cassian says. I brought the woman who kept me alive when I had 6 hours left, Aldrich says. Yes. Cassian looks at Sera. She meets his gaze directly. She has been practicing this for 3 weeks. Not the meeting of the gaze, she has always done that, but the specific quality of it. The gaze that says, I know what I am and I am not afraid of you knowing it. Sit down, Cassian says. He looks at her for a long moment. Are you afraid? He says. She considers the honest answer. I'm aware, she says, of what I'm in and what it might cost me. But not afraid, he says. I have been afraid for 8 years, she says. I have been hiding for 8 years because I was afraid. And people died while I was hiding. I am done letting fear make my decisions. Cassian looks at her. Then at his brother. Then back at her. Tell me, he says, what you can do. He tells him. Not the legal argument. That comes later in the council. He tells him what healing is. What it actually is, stripped of the word witchcraft and the 3 generations of fear built on top of that word. She tells him what knowledge it requires, how that knowledge is acquired, what it can address and what it cannot. She tells him about the fever 8 years ago. He tells him about the 1,000 people. He tells him about her mother. She tells him about her grandmother in the root cellar. She tells him about Tomas's daughter Elra, who is 9 years old and alive. Cassian Thorne listens. He listens the way his brother listens. Not waiting for his turn, actually listening, the full attention of someone who is trying to understand rather than confirm. When she finishes, the room is quiet. What do you want? He says. I want the law changed, she says. Healers recognized as practitioners, not criminals. A framework for training and licensing. Your concern is harm, I understand that, and a framework addresses it. I want the purging formally acknowledged as a mistake. She pauses. I want to be allowed to do what I am. Cassian looks at her. The council will resist, he says. I know, she says. Some of them will call for your arrest the moment you walk in, he says. I know, she says. You're prepared for that. I'm prepared to stand there and let them say it, she says. And then I'm prepared to answer it. He looks at his brother. Aldrich holds his gaze. She saved my life, Aldrich says. With knowledge that the law calls criminal. That is what we are going to tell the council. Cassian is quiet for a long moment. He looks at the fire. He looks at his hands. He looks at Sera. I'll convene the council tomorrow morning, he says. She does not sleep well. This is expected. She has not slept well for 8 years on the nights before anything that matters. Her body's way of insisting that she take things seriously, which she has always found redundant but cannot argue with. Aldrich arranged a room in the palace. She lies in the large bed in the quiet palace room and stares at the ceiling and runs through everything she has prepared. The records. The witness accounts. The history she wrote. The argument she has been building for 3 weeks. She thinks about the people she has treated. She thinks about the people who died in the fever that she could not reach in time or could not help in the open, or could not help at all because there was only one of her and she could only be in one place. He thinks about the ones who are alive. He thinks about them most. At some point before dawn she stops trying to sleep. He gets up. He gets dressed. She takes the records from the oilcloth and goes through them one more time. Not to memorize them, she has them memorized, but because going through them is how she feels connected to the people who kept them. Her grandmother with her precise, careful hand. Her mother who thought in the margins. She writes in her own journal. Today I am going to stand in a room and be what I am. Whatever happens after, I am going to stand in that room. I am not going to look for the exit. I am not going to hide. I have been hiding for 8 years. My grandmother hid for most of her life. My mother hid until the hiding killed her. Not directly but indirectly in every way that matters, because hiding meant working alone and working alone meant dying in a room without help. Someone has to be first. I have been waiting for someone else to be first. Today it's me. She closes the journal. She looks at the window. The sky is just beginning to lighten. There is a knock at the door. She opens it. Aldrath. He is dressed. He looks like he also did not sleep. The council convenes in 2 hours, he says. I know, she says. He looks at her. How are you, he says. She thinks about the honest answer. Ready, she says. He nods. Sera, he says. Yes, she says. Whatever happens in there. He stops. Starts again. I know I cannot guarantee the outcome. But I want you to know that I am. He pauses. I'm not going to step back. Whatever it costs. She looks at him. At the prince who rode through the wrong forest looking for something he already believed in. At the man who said, I'd rather give you accurate information and let you make a real decision. At the person who looked at her records and said, 1,000 people. At minimum. I know, she says. She picks up the oilcloth package. Let's go, she says. The council chamber is larger than she imagined. This is almost funny because she has imagined it many times over the past 3 weeks and she thought she had calibrated it correctly. She had not. It is taller, colder, more formal. The architecture of a room designed to remind you that institutions are larger than individuals. She walks in beside Aldrath. 15 council members. Seated around the long table. Their faces covering the full range of what she expected. Skepticism, hostility, discomfort, and, a small number but visible, something that looks like cautious interest. King Cassian sits at the head of the table. He does not look at her when she enters. He is reading something. Then he sets it down and looks at the room and says without preamble. My brother nearly died in the northern forest 3 weeks ago. He was saved by a healer. She's here today. I want the council to hear her. A council member at the far end of the table. Older, sharp-faced, the expression of someone who has been wrong about fewer things than you think and knows it. Your Majesty, the individual you are describing is a criminal under existing. Lord Farron, Cassian says. Quiet. Precise. I said I want the council to hear her. That is what is going to happen. Lord Farron sits back. Sera steps forward. She puts the oilcloth package on the table and opens it. She lays out the records. Her grandmother's. Her mother's. Her own. She does this methodically without hurry. The sound of pages on the table surface. The specific quiet of a room where people are watching something and not sure what it is yet. My name is Sera, she says. My mother's name was Doran. My grandmother's name was Yella. Yella survived the purging in a root cellar under a neighbor's floor. She spent 3 days there while her neighbors burned. When she came out, she treated the people who had hidden her. She kept records of every patient she treated for the rest of her life. She slides the grandmother's records to the center of the table. These are those records. 47 patients during the purging alone. 312 over the course of her life. Every date. Every presenting condition. Every treatment. Every outcome. Lord Farron, this is not. I'm not finished, she says. She is surprised by her own voice. It is steady. It is steady in a way that she did not plan for it to be. She expected to have to make it steady, expected to feel the effort of holding it there. It is simply steady. Like it has been waiting for this room for a long time. My mother continued the records, she says. Her practice ran for 20 years. 206 patients. Documented. She slides her mother's records. 8 years ago the Eastern fever came through the provinces. My mother treated as many people as she could reach. She treated them in secret at night because the law required her to treat them in secret. She died of the fever herself because she was working alone. Because she could not ask for help. Because asking for help meant being found. She pauses. 3,000 people died in that fever. The available evidence suggests that a third of them did not need to die. If there had been healers who could practice openly, who could have moved through the villages in daylight, who could have trained others, who could have asked for assistance, 1,000 people might have lived. She looks at the table. My mother is in that number. Not as a patient. As a practitioner who died because she was not allowed to practice safely. The room is very quiet. These are my records, she says, sliding her own. 8 years. 41 patients. Every one of them alive. Because someone who knew what to do did it. She looks at Lord Farron. You are going to call this criminal, she says. You're welcome to do that. You are welcome to look at these records and tell me which of these patients should have died instead. Lord Farron does not speak. Aldrath steps forward. 3 weeks ago, he says, I had 6 hours to live. Redthorn poison in the northern forest. Sera treated me. These are not abstractions. I am standing in this room because of what she did. He looks at the council. And I am asking this council, what do we call what we did to every healer before her? Cassian looks at the records on the table. He looks at Sera. Lord Farron, he says. Is there anything in these records that constitutes what the law defines as harmful practice? Lord Farron is very quiet. No, he says finally. There is not. Then I want a formal review of the healer laws, Cassian says. Convened by end of week. I want the records submitted as evidence. He looks at Sera. And I want this council to understand that the review is not a question of whether the law is changed. It is a question of how. Lord Farron opens his mouth. Cassian looks at him. Farron closes it. Sera stands at the council table in the capital city of a kingdom that has been calling her kind witches for 3 generations. She is not behind Aldrath. She is not looking for the exit. She is exactly where she is. The review takes 4 weeks. It is 4 weeks of the most sustained, focused, sometimes exhausting work she has done since the fever. She presents to the review committee. She answers questions, hundreds of questions, some hostile, some genuinely curious, some from people who are figuring out in real time that they have been wrong about something significant and are trying to understand how that happened. She answers all of them. Aldrath is present for most of it. Cassian for some. The king, she learns over the 4 weeks, does what he said. He turns things over. He is slow to decide and thorough when he does. He visits her records twice. He asks her directly twice whether she is certain of her outcomes data. Both times she says yes. Both times she shows him the documentation. On the 23rd day, a council member named Wen, mid-50s, has been mostly quiet through the review, the face of someone who has been thinking. Asks Sera if she would be willing to help design the licensing framework. She says yes before she finishes the sentence. On the 28th day, Cassian convenes the full council. He presents the proposed law. Healers recognized as licensed practitioners. A framework for training and examination. A formal body for oversight with healer representation. The purging formally acknowledged in the historical record as a misuse of royal authority. The vote is 12-3. Farron votes against. She watches him vote against and feels, not triumph, not satisfaction exactly. Something more complicated. The awareness that he will always vote against. That some people will always vote against. That 12-3 is not unanimity and she is not going to pretend it is. But 12-3 is enough. The law changes on a Thursday afternoon. She is standing in the council chamber when it does. Aldrath is beside her. He does not look at her when the vote is announced. He is looking at the table. She looks at him. She can see what is happening in his face. The specific expression of someone who has been working towards something for a long time and has arrived at it and is in the complicated moment of arrival, which is not purely joy, which is joy mixed with the awareness of everything it cost and the awareness that there is still more to do. She knows that feeling. She has been feeling it for 4 weeks. She puts her hand on his arm. He looks at her. She does not say anything. Neither does he. They stand in the council chamber while the vote is recorded and the law is written, and the world changes by exactly the amount it changes, which is not everything but is enough for now. That evening, Cassian asks her to stay. Not permanently, he is careful about this, he does not presume, but for the immediate period of implementing the framework. He knows the most. Her records are the most comprehensive. Her family's knowledge is the foundation on which the training program will be built. She says she needs to think about it. She does think about it. For about 2 hours, sitting in the room that is now genuinely her room in a palace that is beginning to feel like somewhere she is allowed to be. He thinks about Valen. About the sign she painted. About the back room and the herbs and the 8 years of inventing names. He thinks about the neighbor who brought bread in the dark. She's going to find out who that person was. She's going to put their name in something that lasts. She thinks about her grandmother with her precise, careful hand. She thinks about her mother in the margins. She picks up her journal. She writes. The law changed today. I was there. I said my name out loud in a room full of people and the ceiling did not fall. My grandmother's name is going into the new historical record. My mother's name too. They are going to be described as practitioners, not criminals. I'm going to stay for a while and help build the thing that should have existed 3 generations ago. It is not everything. It is enough for today. Tomorrow there will be more. She closes the journal. She picks up her mother's kit. She opens it. The herbs are still good. She has maintained them carefully. She has always maintained them carefully. She closes the kit. She goes to find Aldrich. He is in the corridor outside her room, which she discovers when she opens the door. He is also clearly trying to look as if he happened to be passing through the corridor rather than specifically standing outside her room, which she finds transparently unconvincing and does not comment on. I'm staying, she says. I know, he says. She looks at him. How do you know? Because you said, someone has to be first, he says. And you are not someone who does something and then leaves before it's finished. She looks at him. At the prince who rode through the wrong forest. At the man who told her the truth about what he could and could not guarantee. At the person who stood in a council chamber and said, what do we call what we did to every healer before her? She thinks about the bond between the man and the person he was. She thinks about the 4 weeks of work and the questions and the committee and the vote. About what it looks like when someone means what they say. You knew I would stay, she says. I hoped, he says. There's a difference, she says. I know, he says. She looks at him. The framework needs a training curriculum, she says. Your brother's committee doesn't know enough about the actual practice. They know the theory but not the practice. I know, he says. I'm going to need access to my records at all times, she says. And my grandmother's records. I want them archived properly, not just stored. Done, he says. And I want to send for Tomas, she says. The farmer. His daughter Elra. She's 9 years old and curious about everything, and I want to see what she does with access to an actual healer who can teach her. He looks at her. You want to start training the next generation, he says. Someone has to, she says. He looks at her. He has, she notes the expression, she is cataloging them now, which is the specific thing she does when she has decided someone is worth knowing well. The expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he has been working toward for a long time and is only now allowing himself to understand that he is there. Sera, he says. Yes, she says. Thank you, he says. For coming. For standing in that room. He stops. For all of it. She looks at him. You rode through the northern forest, she says. Looking for evidence of something you already believed in. In the wrong season on the wrong road, and you nearly died of it, Yes, he says. That is the most inconvenient kind of person, she says. I know, he says. It is also, she says carefully, the kind of person who actually changes things. He is quiet for a moment. So are you, he says. She looks at him. At everything between them. The back room, the records, the 4 weeks of committee sessions, the vote, the law that changed on a Thursday afternoon while they stood in the same room and did not need to say anything. I know, she says. He picks up her kit. Come on, she says. I want to see the training space your brother promised me. I want to assess what we're working with. He falls into step beside her. They walk down the palace corridor toward the room where the next thing begins. Neither of them is hiding. 6 months later, the first class of provisional healer trainees completes their initial assessment. 12 people. From 6 different provinces. Found through the network that Sera and Aldrath spent 4 months quietly building. The people who had been doing this in secret, in the dark, in the back rooms of taverns and behind false pantry shelves and under floorboards, who had been waiting without knowing they were waiting for someone to be first. She stands in the front of a room with 12 people who are looking at her and she thinks, this is what it was for. All of it. 8 years of nobody. 3 generations of hiding. Her grandmother in the root cellar. Her mother in the margins. The neighbor who brought bread in the dark. She found out who the neighbor was. It took her 2 months of looking through her grandmother's records and cross-referencing dates and names with historical records the Capital Archive had on the purging era. But she found her. Her name was Berta Ashvin. She was a baker. She had no formal education. She had no special gifts or status. She was a woman who had a neighbor who needed bread and brought it. Sera put her name in the new historical record under a section titled, Those Who Helped. It is a long section. She intends to keep adding to it. She is in the training room at the end of the day when Aldrath finds her. She is going through the assessment results. She has been noting which of the 12 have specific strengths and which areas need development and what the individual training plans should look like. He does not look up when he comes in. Aura Tomas passed her assessment, she says. Highest score in practical application. I told you. You did tell me, he says. She makes a note. The Farron faction is going to bring another motion in the spring, he says. They want to revisit the licensing requirements. I know, she says. I've already drafted the response. You drafted. 3 weeks ago, she says. I knew they would. Farron does not give up easily. She makes another note. Neither do I. He is quiet for a moment. She looks up. He is watching her with the expression, she has catalogued this one, of a man who keeps encountering more than he anticipated and has decided to stop being surprised and simply be grateful. Sera, he says. Yes, she says. Are you happy? He says. She looks at the assessment results. At the 12 names. At Aura Tomas at the top with the highest score in practical application. She looks at her mother's kit on the corner of the desk. She never works without it nearby. She looks at Aldrath. Ask me again in 30 years, she says. He blinks. Then, are you quoting the general's story at me? I'm quoting the border, she says. The border has good answers. He stares at her. You've been talking to Marin, he says. Marin and I have been corresponding for 2 months, she says. She has thoughts on the framework. Very useful thoughts. She's coming to the capital in the spring. He continues to stare. You have been quietly organizing the healers of Aldrath, he says slowly. Somebody has to, she says. He looks at her for a long time. Sera, he says. Yes, he says. I am. He stops. Starts again. I am very glad you were in that tavern. She looks at him. I'm glad you rode through the wrong forest, she says. He laughs. Real, unguarded. The laugh of someone who did not plan to laugh and has not bothered to stop it. She watches it happen and thinks about what it costs a person to bring bread in the dark to someone the law calls dangerous. She thinks about what it costs to do the first thing. To be the first person. To say, I know what I am and it is not what you say it is and I am not hiding anymore. She thinks, it costs everything. She thinks, it is also the only way the bread gets there. Come on, she says. I want to show you something in Alra's assessment results. She picks up the records. He is not hiding them. She has not hidden anything for 6 months. She does not intend to start again.